Hey, what's up, sports fans? Welcome to Common Sense Sports Talk. My name is Andrew Freeman, and in today's episode, I'm going to be continuing my 2019 NFL preview series, taking a look at the NFC South in this video. So before I get started with my preview, I just want to say that if you like this episode and you like my content overall, you're a fan of this channel, please give a like and subscribe below. It goes such a long way towards building this channel. And if you want to comment your thoughts on this topic or other sports topics related to the NFL and just sports as a whole, let me know in the comment section below or follow me on Twitter. I'll put that in the description below where you can follow me on Twitter. So moving into this preview, we're going to get started with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who had a rough season last year, even though it started off pretty exciting with them, especially on offense. Jameis Winston was suspended the first 4 games of the season due to an off-the-field issue, and Ryan Fitzpatrick came in and was absolutely electric to start the year. And this kind of developed a quarterback controversy throughout the season. Jameis Winston came back eventually, had some struggles there, especially with the interceptions. And that was really a struggle for this offense overall last year. They would generate a lot of yards and a lot of explosive plays, especially in the passing game. But unfortunately for them, they would always find a way to kind of turn the ball over in the opponent's territory in the red zone. Just not ideal, especially when paired with a defense that really struggled. They were one of the worst defenses in all of football last season. Their secondary was absolutely atrocious. They didn't really have a consistent pass rush. Just a lot of issues on this team last season. So they fired Dirk Cutter and they bring in Bruce Arians, who was retired last year, but they bring him out of retirement. He brings in his guy, Todd Bowles, to be their defensive coordinator after he got fired by the New York Jets. And going into free agency, the Buccaneers were stuck in a situation where they didn't really have a lot of cap space to work with here. So they need to get rid of a few veteran players that were key parts of their team over the past few seasons. And they started that process by trading away Deshaun Jackson, their deep threat specialist at wide receiver, trading him to the Philadelphia Eagles for a late-round pick. And then they ended up releasing Gerald McCoy, who has been really the heartbeat of this franchise for such a long time this decade. He's probably been their best player over the last decade or so since, some of those early defensive players in the early 2000s retired. Looking at Warren Sapp, John Lynch, some of those guys back there, Derek Brooks. Joe McCoy has been the best player in franchise history since those guys retired. So losing a guy like him was a huge loss for this team, but they needed the cap space. So with some of those cuts there, they ended up bringing in guys like Ndamukong Suh, defensive tackle, on a 1-year, $9.25 million deal to kind of replace Gerald McCoy, even though, it's only saved a little bit of money there in terms of when you look at the differences between what they were going to pay McCoy and Ndamukong Suh. The fact is that they just did not have any room to kind of maneuver here. So they need to find a cheaper option at that position. It's unfortunate for them because Gerald McCoy was such an important player for this franchise, but it was almost kind of necessary in a way, as hard as that is. But they also did a lot more to kind of revamp this defense a little bit because they're adjusting to a new scheme. So they bring in Shaquille Barrett, outside linebacker from the Denver Broncos, who's kind of a rotational player for them. Maybe he can kind of find a bigger role here. Then they bring in Deion Buchanan, a safety inside linebacker hybrid type of player on a 1-year deal. And then Darian Stewart to be there to compete at the safety position, bringing him in. So they kind of revamped their defense a little bit. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they replaced Ryan Fitzpatrick, who left for the Miami Dolphins in free agency, and they brought in Blaine Gabbert, who's familiar with Bruce Arians' system from their time together in Arizona when Bruce Arians was the coach over there a few seasons ago. And they also brought in Brashad Perriman, wide receiver, on a 1-year deal. He was a bust with the Ravens, just couldn't manage to stay healthy, but he showed some flashes of what he could be late last season with the Cleveland Browns. And I think he fits very well with what Bruce Arians wants to do in terms of throwing the ball deep quite a bit, especially with a guy like Jameis Winston, who has a big arm. So that made sense to kind of take a chance on him there on a 1-year deal. So transitioning from free agency to the draft, it was pretty clear that the objective of the Buccaneers in this past draft was to address the defense and put as many resources as they could into that defense, specifically in the secondary. You look at what they did in the first round, drafting Devin White at the 5th pick in the draft, inside linebacker out of LSU. Now, he's a little bit new to the position, so the instincts aren't quite there. Some of his technique isn't quite there. But Devin White is a freak athlete. He's big. He's strong. He's extremely fast sideline to sideline. And he has the potential to be a guy who can lock down tight ends and running backs out of the backfield and coverage and just be an absolute force for that defense there, an absolute leader for that linebacking unit there. Really like that pick for them because they need to address that position. And then you look at it in the 2nd and 3rd round. This is where they address their secondary, getting Sean Bunting, cornerback out of Central Michigan, in the 2nd round. And then in the 3rd round, they get another corner in Jamal Dean out of Auburn, and then a safety, Mike Edwards, out of Kentucky. So those guys are going to compete. They're going to be in getting some playing time right away this season, especially Mike Edwards, who we'll get to later. It was pretty clear what their objective was, though. Get some more athletic young pieces in the secondary, and hopefully they can develop them because they've struggled drafting and developing talent in the secondary. But with the new defensive coaching staff, maybe this can work out for them now. Then you look at some other picks in this draft that I like. Anthony Nelson, defensive end out of Iowa, is kind of a hybrid edge, interior pass rusher type of player. They're going to bring him in. Hopefully he can contribute to the pass rush a little bit. And then Matt Gay, kicker out of Utah in the 5th round, is a big-legged kicker, a guy that will hopefully solve their kicking issues. They haven't really figured out that position for a very long time. So hopefully he can figure that out for them there. And then breaking down this roster, we're going to start with the offense here. This offense overall, I have them graded out as pretty average. But with that said, there is some potential for this to be a very explosive unit this season because there are weapons on the outside and at the tight end position that are really going to help out this offense, especially Jameis Winston, because when it comes down to it, Jameis Winston needs to establish himself as a franchise quarterback. This is a make-it-or-break-it year for him. He's shown flashes in the past where he's looked like a franchise quarterback. I know there was some talk early on in his career, I think going into his 3rd season, there was some talk of him being maybe a sneaky MVP candidate, and he just never really turned out that way. He's just too turnover-prone, too much inconsistency with his level of play, and, of course, the maturity issues off the field and somewhat on the field with his leadership tactics. Bruce Arians is going to have to develop him. They do have a relationship together. Previously, they've known each other for a very long time. So you hope because of that time that they already have spent together that this will work out for them and that Jameis Winston can be the franchise quarterback in the final year of his rookie contract, and they can kind of build around him going into the future. In terms of the weaponry on this offense, even though they've lost some players, they're absolutely loaded, I think. Mike Evans, he's one of the best receivers in all football, a beast in the red zone, very good jump ball receiver in terms of the deep threat down the field. And then you got a possession guy like Chris Godwin, good route runner, very good hands. He's going to be a guy that catches a lot of balls this season, very effective as a 3rd down option to pick up first downs. So I like him there. If you're a fantasy football player, I think he's one of those guys you look at as a breakout player. And then at the tight end position, you got O.J. Howard, who I think is going to be a superstar at that position. He showed some flashes early on last year before injuries kind of slowed him down a little bit. And then Cameron Brate, who's a very good red zone option for this team. You love the receiving options for Jameis Winston on this team. Now, unfortunately, the reason why I have them graded out as more of an average offense is because there are question marks with the rest of the offense. When you look at running back, it's just not a very talented unit. Peyton Barber got the majority of the carries last season. He was kind of their makeshift starting running back for the majority of the year. He's not a starting caliber player, though, in my opinion. You're hoping that you can get a lot out of Ronald Jones, who needs to step up in his 2nd season. They drafted him in the 2nd round last year. He's got explosive athletic traits, but he just didn't really put it together. And it's hard, I think, for running backs. If you don't have those instincts and the vision, and if you're not able to show that early on in your career, then it's really unlikely that you'll be a guy that will contribute later on as your career progresses. So you're hoping that he can show you something this season. And then you look at the offensive line. I'm not a huge fan of this offensive line as a whole. Now, Ali Marpet at left guard is pretty solid, but other than him, You look at this offensive line here, it's just not a very talented unit. Donovan Smith, I think he's not very mobile or athletic at the left tackle position. He kind of gets abused a little bit in pass protection. Alex Kappa, he's starting at right guard now. We'll see if he works out. He was a tackle in college, and early returns aren't that impressive for me from what I've seen. You have DeMar Dotson at right tackle, who's been a solid starter for them for a very long time, but he's not really good either. But he's not terrible, though. He's just kind of meh at the right tackle position. So overall, this offensive line, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here because with Bruce Arians' offense, he wants to throw the ball down the field quite a bit. And if you're playing that kind of aggressive style, you need an offensive line that can protect your quarterback long enough to allow those long throws to take place. So we'll see if that can work out for them this season. Like I said, there's a lot of potential here. They just need to put it all together. Defense, we're going to transition over there. I had them graded out as below average, and that's because there's just a lot of young, inexperienced talents on this team, especially in the secondary. But starting up front, you look at this team, I'm not sure if they can generate a consistent pass rush overall throughout the season. Now, Jason Pierre-Paul, he was expected to be a very big part of this pass rush, but he's going to miss probably the entire season, if not most of the season, due to a neck injury he suffered in an off-the-field, off-season incident. This is kind of the second big-time injury, serious injury he's had due to an off-the-field incident. So he may not play this season. And behind him, there really isn't a lot of talent at this edge group. You're looking at guys like Noah Spence, who needs to step up after he was a first-round, or rather a second-round pick a few seasons ago. He needs to step up because he's kind of looking like a bust at this point. You have Carl Nassib, who you brought over from Cleveland last year. Again, the aforementioned Anthony Nelson, who needs to step up. You have Shaquille Barrett, who I like. Maybe he kind of has a bigger role as a pass rusher. But overall, the talent level at his edge position just isn't very good. So you need to bring some pressure from the interior. So you're hoping that Ndamukong Suh can be that type of guy. He showed some flashes last year in the playoffs with the Rams that he could be a very consistent impact player. But unfortunately, that was not what he was as a player throughout the majority of last season during the regular season. I'm just not sure at this age if he has the motivation to be the consistent force that he once was early on in his career in Detroit and for somewhat in Miami as well. So going from the front four to the back seven, you look at this team here. They're very young. They added a lot of youth and a lot of speed to the secondary and linebacking core. First, starting off with Devin White. He's a legit leader at the linebacking position for this team. He's going to pair up nicely with Deion Buchanan and Kevin Minter to kind of be athletic, rangy linebackers that can cover sideline to sideline for this team in the short zone areas. And then in the secondary, unfortunately, I just think they're very underwhelming at the cornerback position. We look at Vernon Hargraves and Carlton Davis. Neither has shown a lot early on in their career so far, so you're hoping one of those guys can step up to be a force. But other than that, I mean, that's why they drafted two cornerbacks in this draft because they will compete. They're going to get a lot of playing time. Mike Edwards is already slated to start at the safety position, so they're going to take their lumps, especially early on this season. I fear that they're going to give up a lot of big plays in the passing game, unfortunately. But hopefully, the hope is that they can develop, and hopefully by the end of the season, they're looking like a much stronger unit than they are early on in the year. So when I took a look at their schedule here, I think worst case scenario, they're a 4-12 level team. And the worst case is that Jameis Winston doesn't develop as a quarterback. This offense kind of starts and stops here and there like they did last season, where they'll put up a lot of yards and then turnovers will kind of be what kills them when they get into the red zone area. You're hoping that they can improve there. And, if they don't develop on defense, then it doesn't matter. If you can't defend in this league, especially against the pass, then it's just over. So you're hoping that their young secondary can develop. Now, with that said, I think they put together a pretty nice coaching staff here with Arians running the entire operation here. So I would not be surprised if they go ahead and they get 9 wins and potentially push for a wild card spot late in the season. That would not surprise me. Bruce Arians has always had competitive teams that he's coached, going back to his days in Indianapolis when he took over for Pagano during the middle of that season when Pagano was having his issues with cancer and needed to step away from the team. Arians has shown an ability to rally a team, especially young players, and get the most out of them. So, maybe he could do the same thing here. But ultimately, for me, I think they go 5-11. I just don't see it. I think Jameis Winston has kind of run his course with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here. I think they're going to be looking for a new quarterback next year. And again, the youth in the secondary just really worries me for the long-term outlook of this team this season. So moving on to the Carolina Panthers. This is a team that got out to a hot start last year. They looked like a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Cam Newton was playing very well in Norv Turner's offense, was much more efficient throwing the football. Now, obviously, a lot of that was cut because he was throwing a lot of short passes to Christian McCaffrey, who had over 100 catches last season. But nonetheless, they were playing pretty dang good football last year. Their defense was playing good, as always. But it just seemed like after that Pittsburgh Steelers game, Cam Newton, he got the shoulder injury. He couldn't throw the ball down past 20 yards anymore. The offense started to sputter. The defense started to get injured, and they weren't kind of the same unit as they were early on in the year. And the team as a whole just kind of fell off a cliff. Everything kind of fell off the rails for the Carolina Panthers late last year, and they ended up missing the playoffs, unfortunately for them. So this season, they went about making a few moves to kind of address some of the needs on this team. They didn't really have a lot because, like I said, last year was kind of health that kind of caused deterioration late in the season. But they went out and signed Matt Paradis, center from the Denver Broncos, on a 3-year, $29 million contract. He's a pretty good player overall. I think he can help stabilize this unit. Ryan Khalil retired early on in the offseason before coming back to play with the Jets later in this summer area. But, you know, Matt Paradis, I think he's may not be as good as Ryan Khalil was for such a long time with the Panthers, but he's still a pretty good option there at center. And like I mentioned, Gerald McCoy, he was cut by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he finds his way here to the Panthers. He's going to fit really nicely next to Kawan Short with that pass rush there. Really like that deal there in a 1-year, $8 million contract. He's a very good player at this stage of his career still, even though he's kind of declined a little bit. You like that there. Bruce Irvin at the edge position on a 1-year deal. He can contribute right away. You know, Trey Boston, they bring him in on a 1-year deal. He's going to start this upcoming season at safety. And then Chris Hogan, he's going to maybe contribute as a depth wide receiver at this point on a 1-year, $1.45 million contract. Now, there weren't any big losses. I mean, they let Matt Khalil go in free agency, go to the Texans. He's one of the worst starting left tackles in all football, though, so I'm fine with that. They let Devin Funchess go, wide receiver, to the Colts. You know, that's fine. They were already developing some of these younger guys anyway. But the big loss for them, I think, was Thomas Davis, linebacker, who went to the Los Angeles Chargers on a 1-year deal. You know, he's not the same player he once was, and he's kind of been battling some injuries over the past few seasons, but he's a very smart player and a very good leader in the locker room. So to lose that, he was kind of a key part of this franchise as a whole, even when he's injured. So to lose that leadership presence, you know, it might hurt them a little bit, but overall, you know, there weren't too many major losses for this team. This is kind of pretty much the same unit overall as they were last year in terms of the veterans that they're bringing back and the core that they're bringing back here. So transitioning to the draft, I thought this was a very good draft for the Carolina Panthers. Starting with their first-round pick, they get a guy like Brian Burns, outside linebacker out of Florida State, with the 16th overall pick. They needed a guy to replace Julius Peppers at that edge position, and now they get a young guy in there like Brian Burns, who has freakish athletic ability in terms of turning the corner, bending around the edge, very good burst off the snap, a very explosive athlete as a whole, and he plays a pretty good effort as well. Now, he does need to get a little bit stronger, as most rookies do. He needs to work on his technique a little bit more, as most pass rushers coming out of college do, but he's a very, very talented player, and he's going to be a guy that will contribute right away, I think. And then later in the second round, they get a guy, Greg Little, offensive tackle out of Ole Miss. He was a guy that I thought was going to go in the first round. They get him in the second round. So very good there. He's going to compete at left tackle or right tackle here as the preseason kind of winds down. So maybe he gets a starting position at some point. Maybe they kind of stash him for a season to work on his technique a little bit. Overall, I think long-term, that's a very good pick for this organization. And then in the third round, they got a developmental quarterback in Will Grier, quarterback out of West Virginia. He played in the spread system in college, so he's going to take some time to develop here, kind of learn the nuances of playing the NFL position. And he doesn't really have the greatest physical traits in the world, but Hopefully he can develop into a backup quarterback for Cam Newton, because Cam Newton does have his struggles staying healthy. So you're hoping that Greer can kind of be that long-term backup option there. Then some other picks I like in this draft. In the 4th round, Christian Miller, outside linebacker out of Alabama. He may not contribute much this year, but he's a guy looking forward down the road. He's a guy that can be a situational pass rusher for this team. And they addressed the offensive line again in the 6th round. Dennis Daly, offensive tackle out of South Carolina. I thought he could have gone a little bit higher in the draft, so I thought that was a good value for them there. So looking at this roster overall, we're going to look at the offense first. And I think there's a potential here for them to be a very good offense going into next season, or to this upcoming season. But it all comes down to Cam Newton. He needs to stay healthy, and he needs to take some stress off of himself by being more of a distributor of the football rather than always looking to run all the time. He showed some flashes of being that type of player last year. He's going to have to take that next step in that category, because while you don't want to take his running ability away, that's what makes him special. Cam Newton is a guy that, he's getting up there in terms of his early 30s as a quarterback. He's not a young guy anymore. And those hits, after a while, they're going to start beating him down further and further. So he needs to continue to work on his ability as a pocket passer. And I think with Norv Turner and the weapons available here, he may have the chance to do that. There's a lot of weapons on this offense. First, you look at a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who's a very versatile back out of the backfield. Like I said, he caught over 100 balls last season as a running back. He's a very explosive playmaker with the ball in his hands. He's going to have a very big season this year as well. He's a very, very good player, one of the best running backs in all of football. Then you have DJ Moore, who's developing as a number 1 option for this team. They drafted him in the 1st round last year. He's very good after the catch. So Cam Newton can get him the ball in the short areas in space, and he can do a lot of different things there. Kind of a similar thing with Curtis Samuel as well, who has had a very good training camp. He looks very, very good so far. At least that's what the early reports say out of Panthers camp. He's a guy they drafted in the 2nd round a few seasons ago out of Ohio State. He kind of had a similar skill set to Christian McCaffrey, which is why it was kind of puzzling when they made that draft pick at the time. But if he can break out here, he's a guy that can take a lot of short passes and create a lot of big plays in yards after the catch here. So you like what you have there at the receiving position. And then as an undrafted free agent, they got Elijah Holyfield as a power back. I really like him as a player. I thought he was a guy that was going to go in the 4th or 5th round. He falls all the way out of the draft. So they pick him up. He's going to be a guy who can hopefully be a power back for this offense. And then going to the tight end position, Greg Olsen, if he can stay healthy, he's still a very, very good receiving tight end, rather. He's been the number 1 option for Cam Newton for such a long time. And if he can stay healthy, I think he can still contribute as a pretty good tight end for this offense. What will allow this team to be the best version of this offense will be their offensive line, though. They're built right now to be a power run game type of offense. And up front, they're very big up front, very physical up front. Going from left tackle, they have Darrell Williams slated to start there right now. Matt Paradis at center. Trey Turner, he's one of the best right guards, best guards in all of football. He's an absolute beast in the running game. And then Taylor Moton, I think is how you pronounce his name. He kind of showed last year that he's pretty solid at right tackle. So the only really weakness on this offensive line is Greg Van Roten at left guard. I'm not too sure about him. But there's pretty good depth here with Greg Little and Dennis Daly developing as tackles. Overall, this offensive line will be pretty good, I think, and they will allow the Panthers to do a lot of different things on offense this season. So transitioning to the defense, I think this team is definitely a top 10 unit in the NFL going into the season, as long as they can stay healthy. They're switching to a 3-4 scheme, but they're still going to have some of those Tampa 2 concept that Ron Rivera's run for, it seems like forever as a defensive coordinator for the past 2 decades or so. So you look at the front 3 for this team. You have Gerald McCoy, Kawan Short, and Dontari Poe up front. That's a very formidable front line, I think, for this defense. Gerald McCoy and Kawan Short are more of pass rushing defensive ends in the 3-4 scheme from the interior, so they're going to be in there for all 3 downs basically as pass rushers. while you have Dontari Poe, who's not the same player as he was in Kansas City by any means, but he's still a very good nose tackle on first and second down to stop the run. So you like what they have there. They have very good depth at the edge positions, at outside linebacker. Mario Addison had a very good year for them last year. Even over the past 2 years, he's had an average of double-digit sacks over the past 2 seasons. So he's a very good player at this stage. Bruce Irvin's going to contribute. I think Brian Burns will be very good this season as a rookie. You like what they have at edge. They should be able to get after the quarterback quite a bit, I think, this season with all the talent that they have up front. And then you go from the frontline units to the back seven. They have a great linebacking core led by the second best linebacker in the entire NFL, in my opinion, Luke Kuechly, who's very good as long as he stays healthy. You combine him with Shaq Thompson, a very athletic cover guy at the linebacker spot, maybe a little bit undersized, but he can match up with tight ends and running backs and even slot receivers at times. Very, very athletic. This is a linebacking core that will be able to cover a lot of ground in the passing game. And then their secondary is pretty solid too. Dante Jackson, who was drafted last year as a cornerback, he was pretty solid last year. He's pretty promising. They may need to find another guy who can step up at the quarterback position because you have James Bradbury, who's all right. Ross Cockrell is decent as a slot corner. So they're not the most talented group at the quarterback position, but I think with the front seven, as good as it is, they'll be good enough, I think. And they're pretty solid at safety as well. You have Eric Reed and Trey Boston, 2 very solid starting safeties. So when I looked at the schedule for this team, I think as long as they can stay healthy, they are capable of winning as many as 11 games. This is a good defense. They have the potential to be a very effective power run game on the offensive side of the ball. But if Cam Newton starts to stay healthy again and the defense takes, not that step that I think they will, I think they can lose as few as 7 games. So overall, I have the Panthers going 10-6 this season. I think they're going to be en route to a wild card spot, looking towards the playoffs. I think this is a playoff team, and they should be in that conversation all season long, I think, going forward. So moving on to the next team in the NFC South, we have the Atlanta Falcons. And, last year it was just the injuries on defense that really killed them. And that was kind of what sunk their season early on. They were not really able to come back from that, even though their offense was as good as it always is under Matt Ryan. So going into the free agency period, they needed to address the defense and they needed to address the offensive line because their offensive line wasn't that great last season, even though they still put up quite a bit of numbers on offense. So they brought in James Carpenter and Jamon Brown to compete at guard on multi-year contracts. They bring those guys in. They're not really great players by any means. They're more of low-level starters at this stage in their careers, but they're upgrades over what they had last season. At least theoretically they are. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they bring in Alan Bailey, defensive end, on a 2-year deal, and Adrian Claiborne on a 1-year deal from the New England Patriots. So hopefully they can add another pass rusher there in Claiborne and a run stopper in Alan Bailey for that defense. And then at the tight end position, they brought in Luke Stocker and Logan Paulson, 2 guys that really don't really move the needle in any way. In terms of who they lost their number 2 corner, Robert Alford, to the Arizona Cardinals. Very good athlete, solid player, but this secondary was terrible last season anyway, so I don't think that's a major loss for them overall. Really the biggest loss for this team, I think, was Tevin Coleman, running back to the 49ers, because they had a very nice 1-2 punch there with him and Devontae Freeman at the running back spot. You lose him there. It kind of limits the depth at that position. Some other notable losses, Brooks Reed, who's a very good run-stopping edge player for them. He leaves for the Cardinals again. So not really any major losses, but a few ones where you can look back at and say, well, that could have been a guy that you wanted to keep around. So moving on to the draft, they ended up having 2 first-round picks due to them trading up later on in the draft process, or on draft night, I should say. But with their first pick, it was clear that they wanted to address the offensive line in this draft. So they picked Chris Lindstrom, offensive guard out of Boston College. I thought they should have gone for maybe a guy like Garrett Bradbury. who was more of a center by trade, but he has the ability to play guard and eventually take over for a guy like Alex Mack going into the future. Because I just did not see Chris Lindstrom as that type of prospect to take him that early in the draft. But I think he can definitely be a solid starter going into the future. He's more of a power runner, power blocking type of player. So I don't think it's a terrible pick, but again, I thought there was a better player on the board in terms of the interior offensive line. But it wasn't as bad as I thought was their next pick in this draft, which was the trade up to go get Caleb McGarry, offensive tackle out of Washington. There were two better tackles on the board. We look at Juwan Taylor and Greg Little. But with McGarry, there's a huge question mark into whether he will even play at all because of a heart condition. So I thought that was a huge risk for them. I don't think he was a prospect that those other two players were. That kind of was a head scratcher for me, for them to be willing to trade up like that to go get that type of player. I'm not too sure. And then when I look at the rest of this draft, I just don't see anything that really jumps off the page for me. Kendall Sheffield, cornerback out of Ohio State, in the fourth round. Maybe Jordan Miller at the quarterback position out of Washington in the fifth round to kind of address that secondary can be good for them. They add another running back in Kadri Olison, running back out of Pittsburgh in the fifth round as well. Again, nothing really excites me in this draft for the Falcons. It's one of the few drafts where I just didn't really get what they were doing overall. But it's not the biggest deal overall, I think, because this roster is pretty solid overall. So breaking down this roster here, we'll start with the offense. They're a very good offense. I think they have the capability of being one of the best in all of football this season. Maybe not as good as they were in 2016 when they were breaking records left and right, but they bring in Dirk Cutter in as their offensive coordinator, who was an offensive coordinator for them earlier on in Matt Ryan's career when they had Tony Gonzalez and Roddy White on that team as well. So they're very familiar with each other. Matt Ryan's going to be very familiar with the system, I think. And speaking of Matt Ryan, I think he's one of the least respected quarterbacks in the league. He's very efficient at the quarterback position. He's very, very good year in and year out. He's maybe not an elite talent per se, but he's consistently a top 10 level quarterback every single year. And he's going to put up big numbers once again this season because they have by far the best wide receiving core in the NFL, in my opinion. You have Julio Jones, who's if he's not the best wide receiver in the NFL, he's 1B to DeAndre Hopkins 1A, I think. He's right up there. He's an absolute freak when he is actually allowed to catch the ball. That was one of my biggest problems last year with the Falcons, with Steve Sarkisian as the offensive coordinator. It seems like they would go long stretches of the game where they would not feature Julio Jones enough, and they would just use him as a decoy. I do not see them doing the same thing with Dirk Cutter as the offensive coordinator. I think they're going to have a prerogative to feature him a lot more in the offense. But when you look at the rest of the weapons in this receiving core, you look at a guy like Mohamed Sanu, a solid second receiver for this team. And then Calvin Ridley, who they drafted last year in the first round, I think he's going to be very good in this offense. Just a lot of talent there at the receiving spot for this team. A lot of weapons for Matt Ryan to throw to. Now, they will need to get a little bit more, I think, out of their tight end and running back groups. Like I said, losing Tevin Coleman was a pretty big loss for them in terms of just the versatility of their running backs and the depth at running back. But Devontae Freeman is still a very, very good player when he's healthy. He was injured for the majority of last season, so hopefully he can come back and be a difference maker once again at the running back spot. I think their tight ends are kind of just average. Austin Hooper is solid when he plays, but he's nothing spectacular. So he will contribute, but he won't do anything in terms of making a huge difference for this team. In terms of the offensive line, what limits them, I think, from being a top 5 elite unit on offense is this offensive line. Now, Jake Matthews at left tackle and Alex Mack at center are both great, and I have no questions about them in terms of when they're available, they will play, and they will play at a high level. I have no question marks there. But the other interior positions are kind of in flux. We look at James Carpenter starting at left guard. You have Chris Lindstrom at right guard. You don't really know what you're going to get out of there, but right tackle is a huge question mark for me. Right now, they're slated to start Ty Sembrano at right tackle. I just don't see him as a starting level player, and that could be a huge problem for this offense and kind of derail what they want to do this upcoming season. But overall, a good offense here with the Falcons, and they could be very explosive and fun to watch, I think, this season. Transition to the defense. This defense has some holes in it, to be sure. Injuries did derail them, though, last season. But there's a lot of talented players across the board at every single position group. Starting up front, you had Grady Jarrett as an interior pass rusher. Very underrated player, very good pass rusher from the interior. But besides him, like I said, there's some holes up here up front. They need to find somebody else to kind of generate a consistent pass rush in this team. You have Tack McKinley, who has been solid in his first 2 years in the NFL, but he hasn't really taken that next leap to be a number one pass rusher. And then you got Vic Beasley, who, he's all right. I think his sack numbers kind of have people overrate him a little bit. He doesn't really generate a lot of pressure. He's kind of a guy who gets a lot of cleanup sacks. And he's very, very bad against the run as well. One of the worst run defenders in the entire NFL, I think, in terms of edge players. But they need someone to take that next step at the pass rushing spot for them, because you look at this defensive line here, Alan Bailey, he's not really that much of a pass rusher. Tyler Davison, doesn't really offer much as a pass rusher. They're more of run stoppers for this defense. So someone will need to step up there. And if they do, that'll go a long way to making this defense from going from a middling unit to more of a top 10, top 15-ish unit, because when you look at the back seven, there's some talented players in the back seven of this defense. At linebacker, you have Deion Jones, one of the best linebackers in all football, quite possibly the best coverage linebacker in all football, an elite athlete, has kind of redefined the linebacker position in terms of what you're looking for in terms of an undersized, athletic sideline-to-sideline player. But he needs to stay healthy, because the rest of this linebacking core is pretty weak and lacks the depth that you want besides him. You look at Devontae Campbell's slated to start besides him, Bruce Carter, Duke Riley's more of a special teams guy. When Deion Jones went down last year, that was a big loss for this team, and you saw it. They just did not have anybody that could step up, and they really didn't do anything this offseason to address that position. So Deion Jones, he needs to stay healthy. He needs to be in the lineup available. And if he is in the lineup, then this linebacking core will be fine. But if he's not, they have the potential to be a dumpster fire really, really fast. Then in the secondary, again, solid talent here. You're getting Keanu Neal back, which is nice. He was injured all of last season. They lost him early on in week one. He's a very good player. He kind of fits that Cam Chancellor role in this defense, in this Seattle South defense that Dan Quinn runs. Very physical in terms of coming up and hitting guys in the box, supporting in the running game. And then at the safeties position here, you have a lot of talent here, I think, overall. Damontae Casey had 7 interceptions last year when he had to fill in for Keanu Neal. He kind of showed that he can be a good player in this defense. You still have Desmond Trufant, who for a while now has been a very good starting cornerback when healthy. They need someone else to step up besides him, though, because they drafted Isaiah Oliver a couple of years ago in the second round. He's a tall, lengthy corner who's very physical at the line of scrimmage. If he can be a nice number 2 option for them there, then this defense will be a lot better for it, because once their injuries started to pile up there, they just did not have the depth at quarterback last year, and teams just feasted on that and got a lot of passing yards in the process last season. So overall, if they can stay healthy, this defense is a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. But if their offense is as good as I think they will be, then the middle of the pack is really all they need. They just need to make a few plays here and there throughout the course of the game to give their offense the ball back, because they're going to be explosive on offense, I think. So looking forward to the schedule for this regular season, I think they're kind of in the same boat as the Panthers here. They can win as few as 7 games depending on health and how the defense plays and how the offensive line shapes up. But I would not be surprised if they go out there and they go on a run to win the division as well, getting 11 wins potentially in the process. There's a lot of talent on this team. Matt Ryan's a good quarterback. And like I said, they're explosive on offense. But overall, I think they go 9-7 this season. They're going to be in play for a wild card spot, maybe even the division when it's all said and done. This is a very tough competitive division, though. So these teams may take each other out in terms of wins and losses here. But overall, 9-7 for the Falcons. is what I'm seeing right now early on in the process. So moving on to the final team, we have the New Orleans Saints coming off that heartbreaking loss in the NFC Championship game to the Los Angeles Rams with that terrible no call on that pass interference play. However, they did have their chances in overtime to win the game. So it's just one of those missed opportunities when you look at Drew Brees entering the final years of his career. You don't know how many opportunities you have left to win a Super Bowl. And with this team facing a lot of questions in terms of their cap room this offseason, it seemed like there were very little options to improve this roster with limited draft capital and limited cap space. However, this team, it seems like every single year with this front office, they find ways to maneuver enough cap space to make some additions to their team every single year, and that's what they did this offseason. So some of the major moves that they made, they brought in a new center to replace Max Unger, who decided to retire. They brought in Nick Easton on a 4-year, $22.5 million contract. Now, a lot of that money is front-loaded, so they can get out of that contract after 1 year. But still, he was brought in to be kind of a stopgap at the center spot. They brought in Jared Cook at the tight end position on a 2-year, $15 million deal. That was absolutely necessary for them. Outside of Michael Thomas in the receiving core, they really did not have anybody at that tight end position that could really make a difference in this offense. So Jared Cook, a nice find for them, I thought. And then Malcolm Brown, defensive tackle, on a 3-year, $15 million deal. He's not a pass rusher by any means, but he's a very solid run stopper on this defense. They also brought in a power back, Latavius Murray, to replace Mark Ingram, who left for the Baltimore Ravens as well. So a few minor additions here and there and a couple minor subtractions from last year's team. Overall, this is basically the same core as they had last year in terms of the veterans on this roster. Moving over to the draft, it's really about their first pick in this draft. They traded up into the second round to get Eric McCoy, center out of Texas A&M. They're hoping that he can be the long-term replacement for Max Unger. We will see how that turns out for them. I think Eric McCoy is a very talented player coming out of Texas A&M. It may take him a while to kind of get the mental side of the game down in terms of all the protections and everything he's going to need to do to help out Drew Brees with the protection system there. But Eric McCoy, he's got a lot of potential to be their long-term starter at the center spot. Besides that pick, in the 4th round, they got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I think he's a potential starter at safety long-term for them. Besides that, he's going to contribute on special teams and have some depth for them there. Nothing really much to say about this draft besides those 2 picks, I think. So overall, when I look at this roster, this is one of the most complete teams in the entire NFL. Starting with the offense, this is a great offense, I think, still. They were one of the top 3 in all football last season. Unfortunately, they started to kind of dip as the season waned. So those kind of opened up a little bit of a few question marks, I think, for this offense going into the season, and starts, unfortunately for me, at the quarterback position. Now, I love Drew Brees as much as anybody does. He's one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen play the game. He was an elite quarterback for the majority of last season. But, just watching him play, it seemed like after that game against the Rams in the middle of the season, his arm strength and just his production as a whole really started to dip after that game, and showed in the stat sheet. He was putting up historical numbers in terms of efficiency. His passer rating was well over 120 during the first half of the season, and for the second half, it was in the mid-80s during that time. So I have some questions whether Brees can maintain that elite level of play as he continues to get older, as his arm strength continues to kind of reduce a little bit. And while he did add another weapon in at the tight end position in Jared Cook, there still isn't another complimentary wide receiver that, at least another proven wide receiver besides Michael Thomas to kind of complement his dominance at the wide receiving position. Now, they do have Ted Ginn as a deep threat, and they need some young guys like Traquan Smith and Keith Kirkwood and Sammy Cobbs to step up, but nothing really proven there. They're outside of Michael Thomas, they're not really that talented of a receiving core there. The only big problem for their offensive line is whether they can replace Max Unger at this point, but that's a huge loss for them. Max Unger has been one of the best centers in all football over the past, decade or so. Really, it seems like past 5 to 8 years, he's been a very good center. First in Seattle, now in New Orleans. So he's gone now. You're hoping that Eric McCoy can kind of step in and kind of replace some of that production there. The other question mark for this offensive line is also the health of Teron Armstead. He misses significant time every single year, and I think that's the only thing holding him back from being considered one of the elite left tackles in all football. He's got every bit as much ability as all the other left tackles. And, look at Tyron Smith of the Cowboys, for instance. He's every bit as good as him, and a guy like David Bakhtiari for the Packers, but he just can't stay on the field consistently. He's always dealing with some kind of injury. Besides him, the offensive line is very, very good, I think, though. You have Ryan Ramczyk at right tackle, who's one of the best right tackles in all football. Larry Warford at right guard. Andres Pete is decent at left guard. This is a very good offensive line. They're going to protect Drew Brees. They're going to move people in the running game. And that's what's going to be kind of the thing that makes this offensive go, I think, is the running game. You have Alvin Kamara, one of the best running backs in all football still there. You have Latavius Murray as that power back, kind of a change of pace player for this team. And like I said, Michael Thomas, he's one of the best wide receivers in all football. He's going to have another big year again. He got the big money extension. There's still a lot of talent on this offense. It's just a matter of whether Sean Payton and Drew Brees can maintain that level of play that he showed for the majority of last season, and whether Sean Payton can kind of scheme his way around some of the holes on this offense. Now, moving on to the defense, I think this is a very underrated unit, and they kind of showed that last season. They were one of the best run-stopping units in all football last year. Unfortunately, you lose Sheldon Rankins to a torn Achilles late last season, and you're not sure whether he's going to play this season whatsoever. Now, I think he's going to come back at some point late in the season to add a boost to this defensive line. Besides him, though, I mean, there really isn't any standout players on this defensive line. Obviously, Malcolm Brown is a nice player. But, I mean, there really just isn't that much talent on the defensive line. They have a good assortment of good run stoppers, I think. You guys like David Onyemata, Mario Edwards, Taylor Stallworth, Sylvester Williams, Ziggy Hood, bringing him in. So they're going to be able to stop the run once again. It's just a matter of getting an interior push in the pass rush, I think, is really the main question mark I have there, because Cam Jordan at the edge position at defensive end, he's one of the best edge rushers in all football. Very, very underrated for some reason. He's one of the best players in the entire NFL, I think. Very underrated, very under the radar. You're hoping that they can get something from their interior, but you're also hoping that they can get an extra step from Marcus Davenport, who they traded up to get in the first round last year in the draft. He showed some flashes early last season before injuries took him out. So you're hoping that he can, one, stay healthy, and two, develop into a franchise-changing pass rusher, because if he takes off as a pass rusher and he's everything that they thought he would be coming out of college, then this pass rush could be very scary. This defense could be very, very good this season. So moving on to the linebacking core, I think they're pretty solid there. Damari Davis, very underrated linebacker, has kind of had a resurgence in his career after he was let go by the Jets early on a couple seasons ago. They also have guys like A.J. Klein, Alex Anzalone, Craig Robertson, Vince Beagle's a special teams guy. So they have some solid linebackers here overall, very nice depth, and they do their job well. Nothing really stands out here, but they do what they're asked to do in the scheme. And then the secondary, they're pretty solid back here. They have one elite playmaker, I think, and that's Marshawn Lattimore, one of the shutdown corners in the NFL today, going into his third season. He's an absolute stud, one of the best quarterbacks in all of football, one of the elite young players in the NFL. Besides him, I think there are a few question marks at the cornerback spot. Eli Apple seems to kind of found his role, I think, with this team as the outside corner besides Marshawn Lattimore. But again, he was a bust in New York. You don't know whether he can keep that level of play going forward long term. Patrick Robinson, though, he's a solid slot corner, so you likely have there. There's pretty good depth at the cornerback position overall. And then at safety, you like Marcus Williams and you like Von Bell. Very good safety duo for the Saints here. So overall, very good defense, I think, very underrated defense, and they have the potential to be potentially very good this season if they can figure out that second pass rusher besides Cam Jordan this season. So overall, when I looked at the schedule for the Saints, I think worst case scenario, they fall down a little bit to an 8-8 team, and that's really if Drew Brees falls off the proverbial cliff, so to say. If age does get to him, because he's getting up there in age, guys, we have to start facing that reality that he may not be playing at an elite level for very much longer. So if he continues to show kind of that wear and tear, that could be a rough spot for the Saints. A lot of people are saying that the NFC Championship game might weigh on them throughout this season. I don't see that happening. I think Sean Payton's way too good of a coach, way too good of a motivator to let that happen. Drew Brees is way too good of a leader to let that happen. It really comes down to whether he can stay at that level. But if Drew Brees is the elite quarterback that he has been for over a decade now at the quarterback position, and if this offense is clicking and this defense is playing at their best capability, I think this is a team that can go 13-3 this season and could be in position to be the number one seed in the NFC and potentially make and finally win another Super Bowl as Drew Brees kind of winds down his career. But overall, I think they go 11-5. I think they win the division in the NFC South. It's going to be tough. The Carolina Panthers and Atlanta Falcons are going to be two tough teams for them to kind of go up against in this division. But overall, I had the Saints winning this division as a whole this season. So those are my thoughts on the NFC South as I previewed them going into the 2019 NFL season. Thanks, guys, for watching. Remember to follow me on Twitter as well. Comment, like, and subscribe below. All that stuff goes a very long way towards building this channel. But once again, thank you guys for watching. And next week I'll be sticking with the NFC, going to the NFC North, previewing them. So thanks, guys, for watching.